And once again, this is as much a commentary on the book of Kohelles, the book of Ecclesiastes, as it is really a discovery of the Ramban and his thinking. This drasha that the Ramban gives as he's leaving Catalonia and departing for Eretz Yisrael is really the precursor to his Torah commentary, which he would write when he's during those 3 years that he was living in Eretz Yisrael at the end of his life. But in any event, can I help you? Hi. Oh, great. Come on in. Have a seat. So anyway, so we're continuing along and we're going to actually jump around the psukim a lot tonight because the Ramban is working thematically on trying to describe the hevel that he has begun at the beginning of the drasha, this vanity. Up until now, up until our discussions up until now for the last 2 weeks, we've been describing Shlomo's discussion in general terms about how the world operates. At some point, Shlomo HaMelech becomes specific and he begins to describe his observations of the particulars of the vanity of man's work, the acts that man does in this world. And even though the world itself in general, if you remember we discussed, Shlomo HaMelech had said that the entire world is vanity. Everything that exists in the world, all physical objects are vanity. Nevertheless, here we're going to start focusing on the efforts and the actions of human beings are havel havolim. Those two are vanity as well. But before we get to that, the Ramban now goes off a little bit on a tangent in his drasha, and he discusses a shita that he feels needs to be corrected of the Rambam, of Maimonides. And in this discussion, he quotes from the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, from the Guide of the Perplexed. And there the Rambam states that we can prove from Shlomo HaMelech's book of Kohelles that this world will exist eternally. And this was the Rambam's theory, that even though we know from the Torah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu at one time created this world from nothing, but this world will never be destroyed, and it will exist for all of eternity. Now, what causes the Rambam to say this? The Rambam says this based upon a pasuk in Kohelles, which in just the very fourth pasuk of the entire book of Kohelles, it says, Dor holech v'dor ba, that a generation comes and a generation goes. V'ha'aretz le'olam hamodes, but the world endures forever. So forever means that the world is not going anywhere. The world will never be destroyed. And the Rambam proves this from the Psalms as well, because that David HaMelech composed. For example, in Baruch Nafshi, which is Kapitel Kuf Dalid, Psalm 104, it says, Yosad Eretz al Mechoneha, that God established the earth on its stand, made basically in its fixed orbit. Bal Timot Olam Va'ed, it'll never be displaced forever. So the term forever for the Rambam means an eternity of existence for this world. There are many other pasukim in Tehillim that the Rambam quotes. For example, we say in the Halalukas, Yahalalu Eshem Hashem ki hu tzivav v'nivra'u, give praise to the name of God because He gave command and the world was created. Vayamideim la'ad le'olam chok nasan v'lo ya'avor, that God has established this world forever. It is an eternal law of science that will never change, that the world will exist eternally. Now, the Rambam also quotes the words of Shlomo later on in chapter 3, verse 14, where it says over there, Yadati ki kol asher ya'aseh Elokim hu yeh le'olam, that I know that everything that Hashem makes in this world will exist forever. Alav ein lahosif umimenu ein ligroa, that there will never be anything that can be added onto this world, and there will never be anything that can be subtracted from this world. And then finally, it says, V'ha'elokim asa sheyireu milafanav, that God does whatever He does so that mankind should fear Him. Now what those last few words mean, we're going to explain in just a second. But the Rambam proves from all of these psukim that I've just quoted for you that the world's existence is eternal. Now it's very important for us to note that the Rambam, especially in his writing of the Moreh Nevuchim, was extremely influenced by Aristotelianism. Aristotle had many different theories based upon his own scientific inquiry and discovery about the nature of science, the nature of physics and metaphysics. And Aristotle came to the conclusion, he concluded that this world never was created, and this world exists eternally. There is no such thing as a finite bounding of the existence of this world, neither from its beginning nor its end. It's very curious because the Rambam expresses a great amount of deference to Aristotle, but at the same time he says you cannot argue with the Torah. If at the end of the day the Torah says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this world, and he's able to demonstrate, the Rambam says that the simple explanation of the psukim is that it was creation, yesh me'ayin, kriyatio ex nihilo, something from nothing, then we are forced to conclude that Aristotle is mistaken in his theory about how the world came into being. It has not eternally existed. At one time it was created. But because of his commitment to Aristotelian science, because there is no indication from the psukim that just because God created the world from nothing, the world has to go back to nothing, therefore we are at liberty to subscribe to Aristotle, who says that the world will exist eternally. And it's based upon a certain philosophical model that the Rambam tries to represent, which is that based upon the nature of the divine nature of creation, anything that emanates from Hashem has to endure forever, if this is truly a representation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So as a result, the Rambam maintains, based upon his understanding of Aristotelian science, that the world has to endure forever. And he brings rayos, he brings proof from both Shlomo HaMelech and from David HaMelech that this is what it says in the Psukim. Now, the Ramban disagrees with the Rambam. And the Ramban's basis for disagreement is not on the Psukim themselves, but is based upon the words of Chazal. And here you see a fascinating dialectic that is beginning to form between the Ramban and the Rambam. The Ramban was extremely faithful to the words of Chazal, and any time there would be a conflict between Aristotelianism or philosophy in general and the words of Chazal prevail. The Rambam felt the same level of commitment to Judaism as the Ramban felt, with one exception. For the Rambam, if there was a conflict between the Psukim and Aristotelianism, the Psukim and the Tanakh win. But if there's a conflict between Chazal and what Aristotle says, then we are merely misunderstanding what Chazal really mean, and we have to reinterpret it. This is the way the Rambam interprets the words of Chazal, that Chazal are not foolish. If you take a look at the introduction that the Rambam writes to his Mishnah commentary to the last chapter of Sanhedrin, he says that this is a common mistake that people make, is that sometimes they over-literalize the words of our sages, that when sometimes they mean something in a metaphorical sense, they're not to be taken literally, and this is what causes some of our rabbinic interpreters to look somewhat foolish because they take the words of the sages literally when they're meant as metaphors. But in any event, you see this kind of debate unfolding, and the Ramban says, look, it's an explicit Gemara that says that Shis Alfei Shnei Hava Alma V'chad Charuv, that this world will exist for 6,000 years, and for an additional 1,000 years the world will be completely destroyed and decimated. And then after that point, there will be an ushering to the world to come. The Gemara describes it in much more detail. The Gemara says that there will be a resurrection of the dead sometime right before the year 6,000. And after people are resurrected, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will allow their bodies to rise up above the earth, to float or to fly or to hover in the air. The world's surface will be completely destroyed, and the righteous who have been resurrected will exist for 1,000 years, hovering over this decimated tohu vavohu, this chaos and void. And at the end of that 1,000 years of a sabbatical, the 1,000-year sabbatical, Hashem will recreate the world as Olam Haba, and then all of the resurrected souls that have been rejoined with their bodies will come back down to earth and enjoy this new eternal existence of a completely recreated and perfected world. That's really what Chazal say. So if our sages tell us that the world will go back to tohu vavohu, go back to chaos and void, then you cannot say that this world will exist forever. Now, how do we therefore understand the psukim quoted by the Rambam? When Shlomo HaMelech says, V'ha'aretz le'olam amades, that the earth will last forever, he simply means it will last for a very long time in relation to the other things that I've been discussing up until now, which is the Havel Havolim, the Hevel of this world, which is truly transitory and fleeting. Compare that to the things that are solid state, to the universal concepts like we talked about the last couple of weeks, to the elements of this world, to the universal concepts of this world, to the truisms of this world. Those things last forever, meaning until the end of the year 6,000. But forever doesn't mean literally forever. It just means until for a very, very long time, for a protracted period of time. But then, of course, everything that is part of the physical universe will eventually be destroyed and go back to tohu vavohu. Similarly, all of the psukim that the Rambam and the Moreh Nevuchim quotes from Tehillim, also it's those things that Hashem created will endure to fulfill their role for however many generations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allotted for them. But then at their designated time, when it's time to restore the world to Olam Haba, those things will cease as well. And indeed, all laws of science that the Ramban said are permanent, all bets are off. When Hashem destroys this physical world, there'll be a completely new set of rules of science, a completely new set of universal concepts that the Ramban says is not part of the Hevel that Shlomo HaMelech was describing. Furthermore, he says, we can point to other psukim that indicate the temporary nature of our world and of our universe. So, for example, if we go to Kapitel in Tehillim, we go to Kapitel Kuf Beis, we go to Psalm 102, it says quite explicitly over there, Lefanim haaretz yasadeta, u'ma'aseh yadecha shamayim, that originally God, you formed the earth and the heavens. Hema yovedu ve'ata sa'amod. Heaven and earth will eventually fall away and be lost. But you, Hashem, are truly everlasting. The chulam kabeged yivlu. Everything in this world is like a worn-out garment at some point in its existence. Kalavush tachalifeim v'yachlofu. God, this world is a garment, this physical world. And just like a garment gets old, and you wear it down to the threads, and you have to exchange it, put on something new, that's what you're going to do to our world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This world will eventually get worn out, and you'll throw it away, and you'll start to put on a new garment, a new world. But you, Hashem, that should be familiar from our liturgy, but you, Hashem, and your age will never cease to exist. So bottom line, the Ramban says, is that you cannot adduce from the psukim one way or the other, because the psukim do not speak in that level of specificity to determine whether the world is truly eternal or just lasts for a very, very long time. But finally, the Ramban on this topic says that we can also point to psukim in the Chumash that allude to the temporary nature of our universe. Indeed, and the Ramban elaborates on this in his Torah commentary, as do many of the other Rishonim, such as Rabbeinu Bechaya and even the Abarbanel, talk about this as well, that there are certain mitzvahs in the Torah that allude to the cyclical nature of our universe. What mitzvahs am I referring to? Shemitah and Yovel. The Ramban says this, and the Rabbeinu Bechaya, who's a disciple of the Ramban, goes even further in describing how the mitzvah of Shemitah, the sabbatical year, is really one aspect of the Shemitah, is an allusion to the cyclical nature of the entire cycle of the universe. Just like for 6 years you shall work the land, and for the 7th year it remains fallow, that's actually an allusion to the 6,000 years of this world's existence, and the 1,000 years of the fallowness that is described by our sages in Sanhedrin. And furthermore, the 49-year cycle which is 7 times 7 of the Shemitah cycle, which is completed by a 50th year of the Jubilee year of the Yovel, that is an allusion to a super cycle, which is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will create 7 cycles of 7, meaning that there will be 7 iterations of 7,000-year worlds. And we are in, according to the Mekubalim, we are in the 4th iteration of the Yovel cycle. So our world is within its 6,000-year period. We're now in the year 5,773 of that 6,000-year period. So we don't have that much time left. We have less than about 220-something years left before the world is supposed to go back to Tohu Vavohu. And once that period is over, the world goes through its 1,000 years of Tohu Vavohu, we will be ushered into Olam Haba, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will create a new universe, a new physical universe, which will have a totally different tafkid, a totally different purpose from the purpose of our world. Our universe's tafkid is Torah. The next universe's world will have a different Torah or something else as its tafkid. Now, of course, these are not things that the Rambam would ever feel comfortable acknowledging, because the Rambam did not hold of Kabbalistic literature, and also because, as I mentioned, he was very much committed to the Aristotelian concept of the eternity of the universe. So that was really just an aside. Now let's get back into the text of Kohelles. For this is all part of this drasha that we're studying of the Rambam. Okay, so we're going to start now with the 2nd chapter of Kohelles, and we're going to get back, like as I mentioned to, the specificity now focuses in on the Amal Ha'adam. Ma Yisrael La'adam B'chol Amalo Sheya'amol Tachas HaShamesh. Remember that Shlomo HaMelech had begun to say that not only in general is everything in the physical universe vanity of vanities, but also specifically he talks about human endeavors. Human endeavors are truly vanity. And this he elaborates upon beginning in Perek Beis, beginning in the 2nd chapter. Now, the Ramban points out that the purpose why Shlomo HaMelech needs to emphasize this idea that human endeavor is truly vanity is because he wants to drive across 3 very important lessons in the book of Kohelles. What are the 3 important lessons that Shlomo wants to bring across in the book of Kohelles? Lesson number 1, that a person should not pursue physical pleasures and comfort in this world because we're all dust in the wind. Everything is fleeting and nothing lasts. So anything that man tries to pursue as far as physical gain in this world, it's simply not worth it. You're not going to end up with anything of substance. So therefore, at the very beginning of Perek Beis, if we look at verses 4 and 5, it says, Higdalti ma'asoi, that I have done a lot of things in my life. Banisili batim, I've built plenty of houses. Natati li keromim, I've planted many vineyards. In Pasuk Hey, he says, Asisi li ganos ufardesim, I've made for myself orchards and gardens. V'natati vahem eitz kol peri, and I've planted every different kind of tree that can produce all different kinds of fruits. We continue on to this entire section through Asisi li berechos mayim, I've made pools of water, lahashkos mehem yards, omeachetzim, to make all different kinds of irrigation systems. Kanisi avodim ushfachos, I've acquired slaves and all different kinds of attendants in my home. I've acquired cattle. I've kanasili gam kesef v'zahav v'skulas melachim v'hamedinos. I've made all different kinds of accumulations of wealth. V'godalti, he says in Pasuk Tes, V'godalti v'hosafti mikol shehaya lefanai b'Yerushalayim. I have amassed everything I can, more than any other king that ever lived in Yerushalayim. Ach chochmasi amdali, and my wisdom has stood for me as well. Now, by the way, one thing I neglected to mention, V'ha'elokim asasha yiru'u milefanav, that last pasuk, remember I knew I had to get back to it. The Rambam says, and we'll find this in the Ramban as well, the Rambam says that even though the world is eternal, why is it then that we find certain changing phenomena in the universe? God does this in order to remind man that Hashem is present in the world. If the world was completely static and there were no changes, then we would have a situation that existed according to many Meforshim that existed before the flood, where everything was temperate, everything was unchanging. It was like living in Hawaii 365 days a year, no change. You don't have to check the weather, right? And that creates a sense of disconnection between you and the Almighty. When everything is subject to change, but then Hashem does it so that mankind will have this sense of awe and realization that there is some connection between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the rest of the world. But getting back to this idea, so Shlomo HaMelech talks about the fact that he's amassed more than anyone else who's come before him who has ever lived in Yerushalayim. So why does he have to mention Yerushalayim over here? Why is Yerushalayim significant when he's talking about amassing all of this wealth? So the Ramban says, because Yerushalayim is Sevi L'chol Ha'aratzos, which is a term that comes from the book of Yecheskel. The word Sevi literally means a deer, but here it means the most beautiful and glorious land that exists. It's the most temperate, and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi mentions this as well, that Yerushalayim is situated in its location in the Middle East geographically such that it has an extremely temperate climate. It's not too far north to be chilly, and it's not too far south to be hot. The temperature is just right. And not only that, but it's the Eretz Yisrael, and Yerushalayim in particular, are known as the Tavor Ha'aretz, known as the navel, the belly button of the world. And the reason for that is because geographically it forms a center for the known civilized world at that time. It's perfectly centrally located so that people from the east and people from the west constantly have to travel through the area through Eretz Yisrael, and even more specifically through Yerushalayim as trading areas to be able, and as routes of trading to get from one part of the world to the other. And therefore, Eretz Yisrael is truly the most cosmopolitan of all places. It's the most international of places because people are passing through Eretz Yisrael all the time. So if a person wants to demonstrate his experience and his knowledge with everything there is to accumulate in the world, he has more authority to be able to say he knows what he's talking about, because he says, I've done this all in Yerushalayim. And everything has passed through Yerushalayim over the course of my lifetime. Anything that you could ask for, there was some kind of trading route that would go either from the west to the east or from the east to the west, and invariably it made its way through Yerushalayim. So furthermore, he says in Pasuk Yud Aleph, he says, Ufanisi ani b'chol ma'asai she'asu yadai uve'amal she'amalti la'asos. I turn towards all of my actions, all the things that I've accomplished in life. V'hinei hakol hevel u're'us ruach. And behold, everything is vanity. U're'us ruach means that, I don't know how they translate it over there. Re'us ruach, I would say that it's bad for the spirit. It's very unhealthy for the spirit. Ve'ein yisron tachas hashomesh. And finally, there is no advantage to anything that exists under the sun. Now, once again, the Ramban explains that the word hevel over here is from the word hevel, like we talk about, hevel shebefihem, the breath that comes out of your mouth. It's just empty breath, and just like you exhale and the breath dissipates, so too all of the physical acquisitions of this world are fleeting and won't last very long. But why does he call it re'us ruach? Why does he say that it's unhealthy for you? He says because, think about if you were to take large gulps of hot air. If a person were to start to inhale a whole bunch of hot air and try to keep it trapped inside of his stomach, eventually if he did that long enough, he would actually get himself quite sick. And there's even a condition where you have air pockets in your body, and they have to be in your stomach, and you get a distended stomach, and that air has to be released. And not only do you not satisfy your appetite, but it actually makes you even more hungry. And therefore, that's what the acquisitions of this world are like. They're like ingesting hot air and getting distension in the stomach from that hot air. Not only does it not satisfy you, but it only makes you hungrier. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number one that Shlomo HaMelech wants to communicate to us is that the whole amal, all of the efforts that human beings make in this world to try and get more things, get more acquisitions, is really meaningless. It's vanity. It's not worth it. Lesson number 2 that Shlomo HaMelech is trying to communicate is that if this world is truly temporary, then that leaves us with a question. It's a question that we spoke about last time as well, which is, what's the point of doing anything in this world? What is the point of worldly existence at all if everything is Hevel? And Shlomo HaMelech, after he's posited that the whole world is Hevel, has to explain that there is value to certain things and to certain human endeavors in the world. It's true that pursuing worldly pursuits and worldly acquisitions is Hevel, but there are certain things that are worth our attention and worth our efforts to make in this world. So he tells us, he reassures us that while the specific physical items of this world are temporary, the general concepts of this world, what we talked about is last time as the universal concept of this world, the elements of this world, and the general ideas of scientific inquiry and knowledge, those are things that will present a person with wisdom and will feed his soul. And that, he says, we have to turn to Pasuk Gimel, to Pasuk, Perek Gimel, rather, Pasuk Yudalet, Pasuk 14. And he says as follows, Shlomo HaMelech says, Yadati ki kol asher ya'aseh ha'elokim hu yihiyeh le'olam. I know that, and we quoted this pasuk once before, I know that everything that Hashem made in this world will endure forever. Alav ein lahosifu mimenu ein ligra, ve'elokim asah sheyiru milafanav. That you cannot add to what Hashem has made, you cannot take away from it. And this pasuk seems to directly contradict the whole concept of Hevel. If everything is Havel Havolim and it'll eventually fall away, then how can Shlomo contradict himself and say that the world will exist forever and you can't add or subtract to the things in this world? So there are universals of this world. There are universals that a person can nourish his soul with, which is not made of the elements of this world to begin with, and those things have permanence. And in this pasuk, Shlomo is also explaining why Hashem constantly presents the world with change. And again, as I explained, so that people should be more fearful of Hashem. So based upon this, Shlomo's conclusion is that a person should not indulge in unnecessary and superfluous indulgences of the world, but should rather engage in those things that will foster the fear of Hashem. And therefore he says in Perek Dalid, in the 4th chapter, the 6th verse, he says, Tov milo chafnochas mimilo chafnayim amol ureus ruach. It is better to fill just your fist with relaxation or with harmony. I'm not sure exactly how we would translate the word nachas over here. Let me see how they translate. Pleasantness. Pleasantness. Better to fill your palm with pleasantness than to take 2 fistfuls of hard work and something that is unhealthy for your spirit. So, therefore, what Shlomo HaMelech is trying to say is that there are certain things of value in this world. Studying things that will help you understand God more, which is to study the truths of this world, the universal concept of this world, the base elements of this world, the building blocks of this world that are permanent. And similarly, of course, to work on the lasting spiritual qualities of this universe. Those are things which will provide you with value in this world. And those are the things that he says, that's the melochaf nochas, that's the palmful of pleasantry or pleasantness in this world. Now, here the Ramban points out something very important, and that is that Shlomo HaMelech really wrote 2 works that talk about the meaning and purpose of life. One is Sefer Kohelles, and the other one is Sefer Mishlei. The other one is the book of Proverbs. But in the book of Proverbs, there's a very important distinction between the lessons of life that he writes in Mishlei and the lessons of life that he writes in Sefer Kohelles. There, he states that the whole purpose of all the wisdom that he's conveying in the book of Mishlei is to train the reader to trust and place his faith in Hashem. He says, for after all, when you return to heaven, you will need to say that you fulfilled your purpose in being born. And since man's purpose in being born, being created, that God created everything so that man should fear him, a person has to be able to say at the end of his life, I fulfilled my purpose. Now, so there's a similar message that Shlomo conveys in Mishlei, but here's where you can tell that there's a divergence between the 2 works. Nowhere in the book of Kohelles does Shlomo HaMelech use the Shem Havaya. The Shlomo HaMelech used the 4-letter ineffable name of Hashem. It's always Elokim, Elokim, Elokim. Elokim asa sheyiru milafanav. You go through all of Sefer Kohelles, not once do you find the word Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. In Sefer Mishlei, by contrast, the more common attribution or appellation for HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. So, for example, even at the very beginning of Proverbs, it says, Yiras Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Reishis Das, that the fear of God is engendered by the beginning stages of knowledge. So you see that Hashem is employed, the name of Hashem is employed in Mishlei, whereas the name of Elokim is employed in Kohelles. And the reason for this is that the purpose of Kohelles is to describe how a person is supposed to gain inspiration and meaning and purpose not through the supernatural power of Torah, but rather through his correct attitudes and observations of the world that exists tachas Hashemesh. And therefore, if we were to try and classify this in the terminology of the Ramban, he says that Sefer Kohelles was written with Midas Hadin. It was written using Hashem's strict attribute of justice, which means staying focused on the natural order of the world and trying to draw the correct messages and inspiration from our mundane existence in the physical world. And Sefer Mishlei goes one step further and tells us how to acquire a supernatural existence, a miraculous existence, using Hashem's ineffable name, which represents the God of mercy and which represents the God of miracles. And Mishlei, therefore, focuses in on the utilization of the beautiful gift of the Torah that Hashem gave us in order for us to advance to that next level of growth. And therefore, we could say in a sense, that Kohelles, while it was written later in Shlomo HaMelech's life, is really the stepping stone for a person to get to the level of Mishlei. It's a very interesting insight that the Ramban provides us with, but it's based upon the fact that Kohelles really is an observational work. It's based upon a person sitting in his palace, having discussing all of the experiences that he's had in life, not saying that I've learned the lessons of life from learning Torah, but saying that I've learned the lessons of life by having lived in this world and having gone through all of the very, very transitory and fleeting experiences that boil down to nothingness. Sefer Mishlei is about the utilization of the lessons of the Torah that Hashem gave us in order to be able to grow to a higher level of tzaddik and get to that supernatural level of the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And therefore the Ramban says that if we were going to try and connect these two works to stories in Tanakh, the stories in the Chumash, we could say that the book of Kohelles is parallel to the level of our avos, the level of our patriarchs, whereas the book of Mishlei is parallel to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu and the Jewish people when they left Mitzrayim. And we know that very famous pasuk in Parshas Va'era, where Hashem says, Va'era el Avraham, el Yitzchak, ve'el Yaakov, bekel shakai, Ushmi Hashem lo nodati lahem. That I appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as not the supernatural God, but as the natural God. The God who interacts with their lives, performs covert miracles for them, but is not the God of supernature, but rather is the God of nature. And that is represented by the fact that I did not yet reveal to them my name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. That is, I did not interact with the Avos on a supernatural fashion to perform miracles that completely alter the laws of nature, as I am doing now with you, Moshe Rabbeinu, in that I'm about to bring the 10 plagues, and I'm about to show that I'm the God who can completely overturn all the laws of physics. That's the difference between Elokim and Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Now, the Ramban also alludes to something that he says later on in his Torah commentary. And that is with this idea about God being the God of nature versus God being the God of supernature, we can also understand why, and it takes a little bit of an adjustment in our thoughts. There's a very famous question that all of the Rishonim ask, and that is, why is it that nowhere in the Chumash is there any explicit mention of what happens to us after we die? After we die, it's a cornerstone of our faith that we believe that a person achieves a final level of recompense, of compensation for his deeds in life after he dies. He goes to whatever we call the Olam HaEmes, we call it the world of truth, a world of eternity, and a person achieves the eternity of the soul, and therefore anything that is not equalized in this world, anything that has not yet been adjusted in this world, is adjusted in the next world. Why is there no explicit mention of that in the Torah? And with this we'll finish. We haven't yet gotten to the third lesson of Kohelles, which I'll save for next time. So the Ramban says that the reason is that the Torah only needs to provide us information about those things in Hashem's system of justice that I would not have known through my own logical conclusions. And that is as follows. There is the God of nature, and then there is the supernatural God. Part of the God of nature is that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is, as he says in V'haya im shamoa, V'haya im shamoa tishmo mitzvosai, if you hearken unto my commandments, then what will happen? V'nasati gishmechem bi'ito yoreu malkosh, I will give you rain in the proper time, the early rain and the later rain, and you will have security from your enemies, and you will have peace in your land, and everything will be, and you'll be able to harvest a bumper crop, and everything will be great. So explains the Ramban, this is not a natural cause and effect. A natural cause and effect is when you plant a seed, a plant grows. But it is not a natural cause and effect that by putting on a pair of tzitzis or by blowing a shofar, you will have rain and you will have a blessed crop. The very fact that this phenomenon occurs, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu in some way integrates the spiritual realm with the physical realm and shows that there is a physical manifestation for our purely spiritual actions, is something that I would not have necessarily concluded had the Torah not said it. And that, explains the Ramban, is the God who works within nature. That's the Kel Shakai, or the Elokim. That is a God who is just and works with us within nature, but is very interactive and provides us with rewards within the laws of nature for the mitzvahs that we do, and conversely punishes us within the laws of nature by depriving us of the gifts that he normally would want to give to us within using the laws of nature. Why then is the afterlife not mentioned in the Torah? So the Ramban's attitude to this question is because the afterlife is intuitive, it's logical. I don't need a Torah to tell me that what goes down must come up. Where does the soul come from? The soul is completely a non-physical entity. It therefore must emanate from a completely spiritual source. Call that heaven, call that the divine realm, whatever you want to call that. But once a person passes from this world and the soul departs from the body, where else is it going to go but back up to Shamayim? So the repose of the soul, that it goes and there's an eternity to the soul, is something that I don't need the Torah to explain to me, because it is so intuitively self-evident that you don't need the Torah to spell that out. What you need the Torah to spell out, however, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates a physical reality as a compensation for mitzvah performance. That's not something that I would normally know, because that's not a normal cause and effect. And that's what he mentions over here when he talks about the God of nature. Now this Ramban is an extremely controversial idea, but it's something that he says both in his Torah commentary, and he also says it in his Sha'ar HaGemul, which is his treatise on the afterlife that he writes in a separate sefer called Torah Sa'ada. This is a much larger work, which we won't be able to, maybe sometime in the future down the road, we'll talk about that as well. The bottom line is that the reason why this is controversial is because essentially what the Ramban is saying is that it's so obvious that the soul is eternal in its existence that the Torah didn't even need to write it. Well, you could ask a question. Aren't there a lot of obvious things that the Torah writes? The Torah says that murder is wrong, right? Torah says that you're supposed to honor your parents, right? So even if the Torah didn't write certain things, I would know about those things as well. So this is one of the kashas that we have on the Ramban's shita, on the Ramban's position about why the Torah's discussion of the afterlife is missing. But nevertheless, that's what he says. We'll take a couple of questions, then we got to go to your next class. Any questions or comments? Quiet group tonight. Yes, sure.
What about the futility of wisdom that he points out? Is that because this stage is more empirical and ultimately we're moving towards the more intuitive perception you were describing initially?
I think that the wisdom that he's describing must refer to the utilitarian wisdom of being able to harness this world in some kind of way to benefit oneself. That's the way he would explain the wisdom that's being described in that particular pasuk. Because wisdom, when it's used purely for gaining more assets of this world, really doesn't serve a person well. But he will later on, when it's a good point. Just to recap, we've gone through 2 out of the Ramban's 3 reasons that the given reasons for Shlomo writing Sefer Kohelles. Reason number 1 is to say the vanity or the purposelessness of pursuing physical things in this world. Reason number 2 is to say that there is value in this world for certain pursuits, and those pursuits have to be emphasized. They have to do with the pursuit of the wisdom of the universals of this world, to be able to come closer to an understanding of Hashem. That does have value. And the third lesson that we're going to learn is that Shlomo HaMelech ultimately has to answer the most basic theological dilemma known to man, which is tzaddik viralo, rasha v'tova. Why the righteous suffer and why the wicked prosper in the world in which we live. And we'll get to that next time. Have a good night.